Imagine walking into your kitchen tonight, opening the refrigerator, and realizing everything inside is on borrowed time. The milk, the leftovers, the vegetables, the meat, the yogurt, the cheese. Every hour that passes makes those foods a little less useful. Most people never think about this because refrigeration feels permanent. It's always there, always running, always protecting the food inside. But for most of human history, refrigerators didn't exist, and somehow, people still managed to eat. Families still cooked, children still grew up healthy. Entire communities survived without plugging anything into a wall, which raises an interesting question. If refrigeration disappeared tomorrow, what foods would still work? Not foods that barely survive? Not foods that become unpleasant after a few days. Foods that genuinely remain useful. Foods people relied on long before refrigerators became normal. Let's start with one of the most powerful foods in almost every pantry. Peanut butter. It doesn't look impressive. Most people see it as a simple sandwich ingredient. But from a practical standpoint, it's one of the smartest foods you can own. A single jar contains a huge amount of energy. Protein, fat, calories. No preparation required. No refrigeration required. No cooking required. You can open the lid and eat it immediately. That's important, because convenience becomes much more valuable when options become limited. People often underestimate how filling peanut butter really is. 2 spoonfuls can satisfy hunger surprisingly well. A sandwich becomes a meal. A cracker becomes a snack. And, unlike many refrigerated foods, peanut butter isn't constantly racing against a clock. Store it properly and it remains usable for a very long time. That's why it quietly appears in pantry after pantry around the world. Not because it's fashionable, because it works. Now let's move to something even older. Honey. Most people know honey lasts a long time. What many don't realize is how extraordinary that statement actually is. Archaeologists have discovered ancient honey preserved for centuries, in some cases, far longer. Honey's natural properties make it incredibly resistant to spoilage when stored correctly. It doesn't need refrigeration. It doesn't demand special treatment. And it offers something many shelf-stable foods lack: flavor, sweetness, variety. Anyone who has eaten repetitive meals for days understands the value of variety. Food isn't only about calories, it's also psychological. The ability to add sweetness to oats, bread, tea, or countless other foods makes honey surprisingly valuable. And unlike many modern products, honey remains useful without electricity, without refrigeration, without constant attention. That's one reason traditional households prized it so highly. Now let's talk about oats. This food rarely gets attention. It sits quietly on grocery store shelves. Most people walk right past it. But oats have fed populations for generations. They're affordable, easy to store, easy to transport, and remarkably versatile. Breakfast is only the beginning. Oats can be used in baking, added to recipes, mixed with dried fruit, combined with honey, prepared in numerous ways. More importantly, they create a feeling of fullness. That's something many processed foods fail to do. People often confuse calories with satisfaction. They're not the same thing. Some foods leave you hungry again quickly. Oats tend to stay with you. That matters, especially when resources are limited. The next food surprises many people: tortillas. Most viewers expect bread, but tortillas often outperform traditional bread in storage situations. They're compact, flexible, easy to use, and they tend to remain usable longer than many fresh bakery products. Think about how many meals tortillas improve. Beans, chicken, tuna, peanut butter. Simple ingredients suddenly feel more complete, and that's one reason tortillas remain popular in cultures around the world. They're practical. Not glamorous. Practical. That's a word you'll hear repeatedly throughout this video, because the foods that survive without refrigeration usually share the same characteristic. They solve problems. And the next food on our list might be one of the most misunderstood foods in modern kitchens: rice. Most people already own some. Few people appreciate how useful it truly is. A single bag can provide dozens of meals. It stores extremely well when protected from moisture. It works alongside countless ingredients. And unlike many fresh foods, rice doesn't demand constant attention. The reason rice appears in so many traditional diets isn't accidental. It's efficient, reliable, predictable. The same qualities people value during uncertainty. But something interesting happens when people start depending on pantry foods. They begin noticing a pattern. The foods that last longest are often the least exciting. No flashy packaging, no advertising promises, Just simple foods quietly doing their job. And one of the next foods proves that better than almost anything else, because if your refrigerator stopped working tomorrow, this food could still be feeding you weeks from now. One of those foods is canned tuna. People don't buy tuna because it's exciting, they buy it because it works. Protein, long shelf life, no refrigeration needed, ready to eat. That's an extremely powerful combination. The same applies to canned chicken. Many people overlook it. Until fresh meat becomes difficult to replace. Then canned chicken suddenly looks a lot more attractive. It lasts, it's versatile, and it feels familiar. That matters more than people think. Now let's talk about powdered milk. This is one of the quietest shelf clearers you'll ever see. Nobody talks about it much, yet when supply concerns appear, it disappears fast. Why? Because milk is part of daily life for many households, and powdered milk solves a problem that fresh milk can't. It stays usable far longer. The next food catches many people off guard. Salt. Not fancy salt. Regular salt. For thousands of years, salt has been one of the most important food storage items on Earth. People often forget that, until shelves start thinning. Salt improves food, preserves food, and stores indefinitely when kept dry. Then there's flour. This one creates a fascinating pattern. Most people don't bake regularly. Yet when uncertainty rises, flour suddenly becomes one of the most desired foods in stores, because flour creates possibilities. Bread, pancakes, biscuits, countless meals. People love options. Flour provides them. Now, let's move to canned soup. Not all soups. The thick ones. Beef stew, chunky soups, lentil soups. The kinds that actually feel like meals. People often ignore them when shelves are full, then wish they had them later, because convenience becomes incredibly valuable when resources feel limited. And there's one final category that nearly always vanishes. Coffee, not because it's essential for survival, because routines matter, comfort matters, normality matters. People underestimate that, until they're standing in front of an empty shelf wishing they'd grabbed one extra container. But here's what most people miss. The real lesson isn't about any single food, it's about timing. Because when shelves are full, nobody feels urgency. When shelves are empty, nothing feels urgent except the things you can no longer find, and that's when regret starts. But the final foods on this list might be the most important of all. Let's talk about pasta. People rarely appreciate pasta until they need it. It's affordable, stores easily, works with countless ingredients, and creates filling meals from very little. That's why entire cultures built traditions around it. A box of pasta doesn't look remarkable sitting on a shelf. But combine it with canned meat, beans, oil, simple sauces, and suddenly you have complete meals, again and again, without refrigeration. That's real value. Now let's move to cooking oil. This is one of the most overlooked pantry foods. People focus on food itself, but forget the ingredient that transforms food. Oil adds calories, improves flavor, supports cooking, and helps turn basic ingredients into satisfying meals. Without oil, many pantry foods feel incomplete. With oil, they become much easier to enjoy. That difference becomes obvious surprisingly quickly. And finally, let's discuss one of the oldest foods on Earth. Salt. People see salt as seasoning. Historically, it was much more than that. Salt preserved food, protected food, improved food, supported entire trade routes. Empires valued salt so highly that it became a form of payment in some societies. There's a reason for that. Salt extends possibilities. Even today, its usefulness remains extraordinary. Small, inexpensive, easy to store, and endlessly practical. Now step back and look at everything we've discussed. Peanut butter, honey, oats, tortillas, rice, beans, tuna, powdered milk, crackers, dried fruit, nuts, pasta, cooking oil, salt. Notice something? None require refrigeration. Yet together they can create hundreds of meal combinations. Breakfasts, lunches, dinners, snacks, simple meals, comfort foods. The interesting lesson isn't that refrigerators are unnecessary, they're incredibly useful. The lesson is different. Most people don't realize how dependent they've become on refrigeration. Modern grocery shopping encourages it. Fresh products, prepared foods, constant replenishment. Everything assumes the refrigerator will always be there. And usually, it is. But understanding alternatives changes the way you think about food. You stop looking only at freshness, you start noticing shelf life, flexibility, reliability. You begin asking different questions. Would this still work without refrigeration? Would this still be useful next month? Would I actually enjoy eating this repeatedly? Those questions lead to better food choices. Not because you're expecting problems, because practicality has value regardless. And that's the real secret behind pantry foods. They're not exciting because they're designed for emergencies. They're useful because they solve everyday problems. Long shelf life, less waste, more flexibility, more options. Those benefits matter even when everything is working perfectly, which explains why generations before refrigeration relied on these foods so heavily. They weren't surviving. They were simply choosing foods that worked. And remarkably, many of those same foods still work today. Sometimes the most useful ideas aren't new at all. They're the ones people quietly depended on long before modern convenience arrived. And if your refrigerator stopped working tomorrow, these are the foods that would remind you why.